You know who you are. Okay. Jocelyn, they are making sure that you have screen sharing privileges. I just passed that
Yep.
out.
Looks
Okay,
like it. Yeah.
good. Okay. All right. When we get Representative Lamar, we're going to have to clone him because at the moment he needs to be in 3 different places. So he's asked me to run with the ball until he joins us in about half an hour. I don't know. I guess at this time of the session, the fact that he only has to be in 3 places is an easy day. So, okay. Well, that's not good. We were at 21 and then we went back to 19. We're losing people already. All right, I'm going to give it one more minute. All right, Matt Danzer, while we're waiting, I'm going to pick on you. Congratulations on the birth of your son.
Thank you.
When was he born and what's his name?
His name is John, but we're calling him Jack, and he was born on February 16th.
Oh, good for you. And the invasion will begin shortly. So
Yeah, some families already visited, and others are making their plans now.
good for you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. We're over 20 people, so I'm going to that's about 80%. So I'm going to go ahead. Representative Lamar, it will join us shortly. First thing I want to do is there anybody on here who is joining, a working group member is joining us for the first time, like who missed the last 2 meetings? Kylie, why don't you go ahead and just quickly introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Kylie. I'm sorry I haven't been able to join you for the last couple meetings. Full name Kylie Goslin, Executive Director of the Partnership for Strong Communities. And for those of you who don't know, the partnership has been around for a while and is a policy and advocacy organization dedicated to affordable housing and homelessness.
Great, thank you. Okay, you all have the agenda, but let me just introduce it and kick it off. The focus today is to educate ourselves about best practices, practice pointers about how a town municipality goes about organizing itself to prepare an affordable housing plan. And I'm very happy to say that we have a wonderful panel. And I'm looking at Jeremy Ginsburg. Are you on? I don't see you on the list. Okay.
He's joining now.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. So anyway, we have a wonderful panel. Jocelyn Ayer from the Housing Collective in, I'm just going to say Northwest Connecticut, who has already worked on more than a dozen of such plans and will give us her perspective. Glenn Chalder, who is a planning consultant, who has probably done more plans of conservation and development and other municipal planning documents than anybody in the state. Certainly well qualified. Our own group member, Don Poland, who has worked on several affordable housing plans already. And then Jeremy Ginsburg, who is the Director of Land Use. There you are, Jeremy. Hi. In the town of Darien, which is working on its plan right now. So what I tasked this panel to do is, I don't know, I'm going to let them obviously tell us what they think we should know, because I gave them a précis of what our task is, but I asked them, how do you generate townwide interest in the topic of an affordable housing plan so stakeholders will participate? How does one convey the importance of the task? How much of the process should be education versus drafting the plan? In other words, when do you know when it's time to move on from one to the other, or do you move back and forth between them as you go along? How does a group identify the aspects of town regulations that need modification to promote and encourage affordable housing? And finally, if they have a perspective on the sort of the always sticky topic of identifying particular areas of town or particular parcels that the plan might call out for promotion of affordable housing. So the suggested order is Jocelyn, Glenn, Don, and Jeremy, but I'm going to invite the panel to sort of interact with each other as we go along. And if one person's comment prompts clarification or a helpful point, chime in. So it's 4:06, so we're going to try to do this for 35 minutes or so, because we do have about 10 minutes of working group business at the end. Again, I'm expecting Representative Lamar in about half an hour. So Jocelyn, thank you for joining us. And I think Jocelyn's also going to share her screen, which will help her get through some of the nitty gritty. Wonderful. Thank you. Nice to have you all.
Thanks. Yeah, and sorry, I'm sort of a slide kind of girl, so I'm gonna just run through. I thought Tim's questions were great questions to cover. I'm just gonna quickly sort of give you my perspective on them, and then I'm happy to share these slides. I'm not going to talk about everything on them. Are these big enough for you, or do you need me to full screen them?
They're big enough for me, even
All
at my advanced age.
Just very quickly, so you know what the Center for Housing Opportunity in Litchfield County is. We are a backbone organization to coordinate a regional response to housing affordability. So we work with the public sector, the private sector, and a bunch of cross-sector partners in doing that. Tim mentioned I have worked with now 16 towns in Connecticut on their housing plans. Last year I worked with 6 towns. This year I'm working on these 9. It's pretty fun to have 9 regular night meetings a month. So I have worked with many towns on creating their housing plans. The key piece, I think, in all of this is in every town that I'm working with now, we have a housing plan steering committee. Typically that is appointed by the Board of Selectmen. As you might have noticed from the list of towns, most of my towns are pretty small. Most of them do not have professional land use planners on staff at the town level. And most of them are Board of Selectmen, type, government. So usually it's appointed by them, typically between 5 and 10 members. And the representation piece is what's really important, in my view. We typically have 1 or 2 folks from the Board of Selectmen, usually just 1. Somebody, at least 1 or 2 people from planning and zoning. If there's a local housing authority or a local nonprofit working on housing in that town, having somebody from that group be a part of this. Somebody from the Economic Development Committee or Commission, Social Services Director, Senior Center Director. Those are kind of usually the core folks that we want to have represented ideally on these steering committees. And again, this is a committee that doesn't necessarily have to become a permanent part of the town. So these can be volunteers that aren't committing to, a meeting a month for the rest of their lives. But, just for the period of producing the plan. It's obviously also kind of great if you can get a local builder, a realtor, a school board member, historic district commission member. We've had local land trust executive directors, which are also great. Sustainable Connecticut committee members. Of course, all of those meetings are open to the public, and you have some kind of regular monthly meeting. But having those representatives of those groups have been really critical in the towns I've worked with. And I'll talk about why in a second. The other thing I would say, and I'm not saying this just because it's job security, although I think it is, I think it's very important to have somebody facilitating the conversation and the meetings with these volunteers who knows about affordable housing and land use and planning and zoning. And again, I'll tell you about why later. because you just really need to have somebody at the table who can answer the questions that come up and know how these things work, know how to talk to the public about this information. So, and Tim's other question was about engaging stakeholders. And I'm just going to actually move on to this one first, because he asked how much of this process should be spent educating residents about the town's housing affordability challenges. And in my view, that's frankly the most important thing that can happen during this housing plan process. Much, much more important than having a 100-page plus document with a lot of research. You'll see here, this is sort of one page from one of the housing plans I worked on in Barkhamsted. That's really kind of just answering some frequently asked questions, like who lives in affordable housing? You know, why doesn't naturally occurring affordable housing count on the state's 830G list? Can this really happen in small towns without water and sewer? So, you know, my view is that being able to answer those questions and bringing the community along is kind of the most important part of developing a housing plan. And again, as we all know, strategies are much less likely to be implemented if you don't do that piece. The way that we've engaged residents in our towns, and we all know how hard it is to engage busy people in a topic like this. But one of the ways that we've done it is very early on in the process doing a survey of residents about what they think the housing needs are in their town. And again, that can also help the steering committee decide what kinds of education they need to do around the housing needs in the town. We do this in a variety of ways, postcards, social media, flyers, webinars, videos, but really engaging that steering committee, which again has a lot of other fingers in the community and network, and using that network of steering committee members to get residents in the community to attend forums or watch videos or do the survey. That has been really critical. So lastly, Tim asked about zoning review and identifying specific sites or areas in a plan. What I have seen is that doing a summary of what residentials or uses are allowed by right in a town versus by special permit. And most residents don't understand the extra barrier that a special permit presents to a developer. So kind of explaining that. And most of them will see that, at least in most of my towns, the only thing allowed by right is single family large lot zoning, and everything else requires a special permit, a public hearing, and a lot of uncertainty around whether you're going to get it done or not. Also, both showing them what the minimum lot size is in their town for a single family house or any other type of house, and then showing them what the price would be if you wanted to go out on the market right now and buy a piece of land of that size. I think what's been really helpful in my towns is having them see what other towns in the region do allow, because they're much more likely to allow it if they know that there's another town they can point to who has done it too. So for example, the town of Roxbury allows 2 accessory apartments by right without requiring owner occupancy, when I can tell other towns in my region that they're doing that and it hasn't, destroyed the fabric of the town. It's very helpful. So I know that at the COG I used to work at, Northwest Hills COG, and I know I just reviewed West COG's housing. I think they're calling it a regional housing plan. They do have a comparison of different towns in that region and the zoning regulations that they have in place. And I think that's really helpful, not just to see what your town does or doesn't allow, but what some of your neighbors do. And then I think it's important, if you can do it, to analyze how much land in each town that's zoned for multifamily is actually developable, because in a lot of my towns, they might allow multifamily in a small area, but that's where the multifamily already exists and there's just no other developable land in that zone. And then in terms of identifying specific sites, I know this is a pretty tricky issue, but what I have found in my towns, again, if you've got the right people on your housing plan steering committee and you're doing a lot of public outreach and communication with stakeholders, some of these sites come out organically during the process. And what I have found is that you can usually identify 1 or 2 sites that would be great for the next, that to be developed over the next 5 years. What I would say is that some of those are definitely not ready for the public to know you want to be further down the road with knowing whether a project is feasible or not before you put it in your housing plan. But the other sites that we often identify in housing plans are, obviously you can identify town-owned property. Again, if it would make sense for housing and the town wants to do that. And then also the other thing that we look at in every town is, can we add some more units to the existing affordable housing that's there now? So those are kind of like the low hanging fruit of identifying specific areas for housing development. So sorry, I went on a bit long and I'll stop sharing. But those are my overall comments on your questions, Tim.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, Glenn?
I think if I can get my screen share enabled, that'd be great.
Erica Byrne, can you do that?
Yes, I just made him co-host.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Very much. So I think like to start off, I guess, with sort of a couple of things overall. I want to do 3 shout outs at the very beginning. First of all, to Goslin. She's been an inspiration to me for much of the work I've done. Really creative thinker on this. I had the pleasure of working with her in a community where we actually had visualization and visual preference plans, and it was an awesome experience and just a great example of ways to do this. Another shout out to Melissa Kaplan-Macy, who produced a document for communities in terms of how to approach this issue. And that was very helpful in getting communities started and having a third-party reference. So Melissa, thank you for that, and to RPA and others. Shout out to Don Poland. Don and I have worked together over the years, but Don has taught me the value of systems thinking. And that's one of the things I want to talk to you guys about today in terms of affordable housing plans. I think the challenge that we get here with affordable housing plans is that we're kind of thinking about the plan and the document itself, but I think we have to put it in the context of the system and how we're going to make that work. And I think the challenge that I can see initially is the possibility of a 3-group process. As Goslin pointed out, is that we get a committee to evaluate the issues and draft the first plan. Communities are doing this. Fairfield and Salisbury had plans some years ago, but most communities in Connecticut are doing this for the first time, and it's hard for them. And I think, as Jocelyn pointed out, you need a good committee. You need to cast a wide net. You've got a lot of experience from different areas. I think a group of 7 to 9 members with different perspectives is really productive. Less than that, you're not getting the input you need. More than that, the group starts to become dysfunctional. But that's group number 1, first of all, is the plan preparation group. The next issue that really sometimes starts to come up is the statute's wording says the municipality adopts the plan. Well, who is that? Because it's not really used in the statute, that term. So in some communities I've worked in, the Board of Selectmen or the Town Council will do it. In other situations, it's the Planning and Zoning Commission that adopts it. DOH gave guidance at one point in time to sort of say, no, a housing partnership, even though it had been in existence for 30 years, couldn't do it. But Affordable Housing Committee, which had been in existence for 20 years, could do it. So I think there's some issues here. I'm a fan of this two-step process in the plan because I think we need to get the municipal buy-in, but they shouldn't be involved necessarily in the plan preparation. So that's actually group number one. I think the next challenge we get to is who implements the plan. And the question we have here is that planning and zoning is going to be involved in part of this. The Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, Town Council could be involved in this. But who champions implementation of the plan? In part of my work around the state on plans of conservation and development, I've asked towns in years after the plan was adopted, what was the most effective thing on implementation? And it turns out to be a committee who's in charge to promote and advocate, support, encourage others to actually do the things that the plan suggests. And sometimes the Board of Selectmen doesn't have that in their normal workflow, or planning and zoning doesn't. So do we need another entity to oversee implementation of the plan? Maybe it's a longer term affordable housing committee, or staff, or with staff support. And then the next question is, the next plan is actually not that far away, right? We're going to have to start thinking about the next plan, and who's going to prepare that plan is the same group. So I do think the process is important here. I think, as Goslin points out here, plan components are sort of important. In every planning effort, there's sort of three main components, I believe. The inventory and assessment of information that really helps people visualize and understand where we're at. I think we need sort of a goal statement, and this can sometimes include the assessment, but then the real meat of the plan are the strategies. I see that some of the work going on in different towns around the state, there's too much effort that goes into the data collection. And we're struggling right now with, you've got census data that's 10 years old, the ACS data, the American Community Survey data, the margins of error on the data are so big is that I'm embarrassed to report what the margins of error are on some of these. So you tend to bury it and people treat it as truth when it's not. But I think that this actually is an opportunity area for the committee to think about for generation number two. Melissa and RPA did a great job with the Department of Housing on edition number one about how to prepare a plan. So how do we make better plans kind of the next time? And I think, again, for strategies, communities, as Goslin points out, are looking to, well, what have other people done on this? And if we can, or you can, or the state can, put case studies out there for people to see, it goes an awfully long way. I think some of the ideas on basic education and assistance for the future is that people don't really know what assisted housing is. And there's not great data sources. So can we run seminars on what is assisted housing and how does that work? What is rental assistance? How does that work? What is CHFA, USDA financing, and how does that work? I think these can all help people. And as Goslin points out, if you can have an experienced facilitator and they can help guide you on that journey. But I think it shouldn't be something that is only a meal once every 5 years. Maybe we could get training and education on this on a regular basis. I think the scariest issue here, I think overall, is this concept of deed restricted housing and how that works or doesn't work in the state of Connecticut. The state of Connecticut does not have standard documents for what is an affordability plan. Doesn't indicate who is a qualified administrator. I found one scenario where a builder's receptionist was the administrator. And as you can imagine, the situation didn't go well in terms of retaining those affordable units. And there are some challenges there. And I think this is an area that if towns find situations where deed restricted housing doesn't work, they're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And a lot of affordable housing issues are going to be opposed only for the reason that we just didn't have good procedures in place. So I think it's critical for us to think down the road what's going to happen in the future. I have a little nitpick, which is the definition in 830J says that increase the number of affordable housing developments in the community. And that's defined in the statute as in 830G, the same chapter of the statutes, as assisted housing and a set aside development. So it seems to be focusing on things which are not units. And I think that that's actually an area that we should get communities to focus on. How do you create units, not, affordable housing development per se. Some of the challenges, this is an oil tanker. You've heard the story about trying to turn an oil tanker. Towns are not familiar with what these plans are all about and how they're going to work out. And I think we have to work with them, to address this situation, to help them turn the super tankers around to address this issue. It hasn't been an issue in the past because housing has never been as unaffordable as it is today. And we have to help people recognize that, because people who have housing don't understand why other people don't. And it's a straightforward story. We just need to explain it to them. Social media and political parties are really very damaging to the process of preparing a thoughtful plan. As you know, last year was the municipal election year, and I had one party in one municipality fear-mongering about what this was all about. And it's unfortunate that, and I recognize it starts at the national level, the state level, et cetera, but we're trying to make good public policy. This is a challenge for us. Inertia, lack of understanding of what affordable housing is. People have these images of co-op city and other scenarios, and it's not. But again, if we could start a public service campaign on TV about this is affordable housing, that'd be wonderful. And good visuals and examples on the ground. Ideas moving forward for consideration. I realize that the committee has a challenge in front of you. Your work is due by the end of this year. But the plans, there's dozens scored coming in to the OPM in the next 60 days. So it's really important, I think, that those plans get reviewed in terms of really, really good things that are in them or laid out in them, the most useful or important elements. Maybe create a website for success stories of things that have been created, but try to build on what we've already done, not reinvent the wheel when 169 towns have spent countless nights addressing this particular issue. I feel it's funny that we have 169 plans being produced in 1 year, and then there's going to be this long lull, and then we're going to have a year where we're going to do 169 plans again. So one of the thoughts for consideration could be to spread the towns out. So the towns that are really doing a good job on affordable housing get another year or two on their plan. And for towns that basically ticked the box but didn't do much, then the issue is you got to prepare a plan in 2024 or 2025, but some way to recognize good work. And I think it would really be important if we could sweeten the pot for producing units in the state of Connecticut. I mean, I think the plans are great, but it's the implementation that's key, and I think producing units is important. It's interesting, if you think back on the history of 830G, it's been in place for 30 years. The actual average is 1 unit per town per year over 30 years, 1.1. And you say to yourself, that's appalling. We can do better than this. So how do we make that happen? Just some final nits. Who adopts? Why not units rather than affordable housing developments? 169 municipalities on the same time frame. And again, challenges with deed restricted units. DOH should have a website that you go to and say, hi, this is for the town of Roxbury. These are the applicable income limits. This is the way the math translates to the rental rate. And based on what utilities are and what mortgage rates are at the time, it produces for you what those sale prices are. I've seen more gymnastics on the math for computing an affordable housing unit sale price. It's scary. And the second thing is we don't have a model housing affordability plan at the state level or some other place. I know that Ridgefield has adopted one, but there should be one for the state of Connecticut. Tim's going to chuckle here. I've seen examples of communities around the state. Tim did a role-playing exercise back in the early 90s. And Tim, thanks for doing that. But he created this mythical development called Hollywood. And I find affordable housing plans which still have the word Hollywood in it. And so it was meant to be a training exercise, not an actual document. I found situations of abuse of capital improvements. Somebody had an affordable unit, put in a fire pit, sound system, and blinds, and other things, swapped out the cabinets in their unit, claimed them as capital improvements, and the affordable unit went from $280,000 to $400,000, and they were allowed to sell it. And the deed restriction, that doesn't work. But because people don't know what's going on here, it happens. So we lose units intentionally or unintentionally, and it's not good. Another scary thing for me is rising interest rates. I've done the math recently on sale prices for affordable units, and a 1% increase in the mortgage rate will cost between $15,000 to $30,000 of sale price on a unit. So here we are getting low and moderate income people into an affordable unit, and they're able to buy into the American dream, but they may not understand that if interest rates go up, they can't sell it for what they paid for it, which is a horrible outcome. That undermines the very purpose of this process. Lastly, I think the two other nits I have is that I don't understand why we're limiting affordable units to only 40 years. They're so hard to create. We can't continue to do this forever and say, we're making changes in people's lives. And second thing, at the end of 40 years on a for sale unit, who walks away with the appreciation when the deed restrictions come off? It's the occupant of the unit. And there actually should be ways to recapture that value. So I hope I didn't take up too much time, but thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys may have.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. Why don't you tell us how you really feel?
Well, it comes from experience. I think I want this to work for people, and I'm worried that the system doesn't. So I thank Don for that. He's my systems guy.
You know that everything you just said is right on. Okay, Don Poland, why don't you jump in?
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Glenn and Jocelyn. Both of you covered a lot of points that I had planned on covering, but I want to touch on a few things. So my experience with doing these plans, while I applaud Jocelyn and her communities in the pulling together of these kind of diverse committees, one of the biggest challenges I found that leads to kind of Glenn's comment. The legislation doesn't say who should create the plan, nor does it say who should adopt the plan. And what I've found is communities have already made the decision before retaining the consultants. And I've had various entities, from diverse subcommittees to PZC to economic development commissions to ad hoc, affordable housing committees, be part of the plan creation. As Glenn also said, the plan doesn't state, this legislation doesn't state who should actually adopt the plan. And I think that becomes kind of the second problematic area. Each town has kind of chosen different forms of adoption, who's going to adopt it. So in one community, it was the town council. In another community, it was the Planning and Zoning Commission. Actually, in the two communities, the Planning and Zoning Commission. In one community, I actually had, it was a committee structure that made recommendations that oversaw the plan. The plan was put forth. Planning and zoning kind of balked at it, didn't like the zoning recommendations, and the town council wanted to move forward with it, and they decided they were adopting it. So how are those recommendations on zoning actually going to get implemented when planning and zoning decided they didn't like what was recommended? So I think the statute needs to be more clear as to who creates it and who adopts it. And I truly believe at the end of the day, these affordable housing discussions, especially since 8-30J is under 8-30G, or the 8-30 segment, we're talking about land use here. And therefore, I truly believe this is a Planning and Zoning Commission issue and should be dealt with by Planning and Zoning, because otherwise you're not going to address the key issues. My process of going through it, I agree with Jocelyn. Education is key, but I broaden it. My education's not just about affordable housing. I start with demographics, changing demographics, societal changes in housing. In 1960s America, only 13% of households were single person. It's 28% today. And it's near 50% on average for multifamily housing. we have to have a discussion about the demographics and changes in demographic structures that are driving changes in the housing market. Early 2000s, less than 24% of housing permits were on multifamily housing units. Today, it's around 47% in a given year statewide. There's been a shift in the market, and it's due to changes in our demographics. So it starts with kind of demographics and then goes into housing overall, the importance of multifamily housing, the importance of diversity in housing stock, ultimately to arrive at then, the importance of affordable housing. So I think the education is broader. To convey the importance, starting at the national scale of an affordability crisis down to the state, the region, and the local, and differentiate it. I truly believe there's two affordability crises, or there's two ways to look at affordability. Either a household doesn't make enough money to afford their house, or that house is more expensive than a household can bear. That sounds like it's the same thing, but it's the flip side of the same coin. If you go to Boston right now with an outrageously unaffordable housing market, you can make six figures and not afford a house. That's not the majority of the problem here in Connecticut. The fact is, we have a lot of low-income households that don't earn enough to afford their houses. The majority of the affordability issue is below 50% AMI. Actually, the overwhelming majority is below 30% AMI in the federal poverty rate. And 8-30G at 60 and 80% AMI and land use overall cannot address that. We can't solve affordable housing for households at 30% AMI. So we have to have a realistic discussion, and I try and engage communities in that. So typically I issue 3 reports. One is barriers to housing and affordable housing. And that's essentially a review of the land use regulations and those things that create barriers. And I put it straight out there in front of the community. These are your obstructions, and this is why, and this is how we can think about them. Second report is then on housing characteristics and the housing needs assessment. What's the characteristic of your existing housing stock? How does it match with today's marketplace? And is it aging? Is it, 98% single family detached? What is it? And how's that match with the buyer today? And then the needs assessment. At what income levels is your housing affordable across types and characters of housing? And to ultimately determine where are your affordability issues and what do we have to target. And then the third report leading up to the plan is then a look at incentives. What are the incentives a municipality can provide to actually help affordable housing get built? That could be zoning and density. That can be tax abatements, tax increment financing districts. And that can also be, sorry, my dog's barking, or one of the many dogs. That can also be a housing trust fund to actually, and I've paired it in one community with is it 8-3K or something that allows for a fee in lieu of affordable housing, create an inclusionary zone, use the fee in lieu of, tie it to a housing trust fund, and allow a developer to buy their way out of providing the units, and then incentivize housing other ways through that. So those are kind of the keys that I've found going about it. As far as identifying individual sites, I stay away from that. That is just a lightning rod, I feel. And, Jocelyn said, yeah, you can identify sites, but they're probably not ready for public share. I don't want to be putting a map out that's showing potential sites. It's how do we get the zoning in place that's going to make it possible to build some multifamily and affordable housing. Just to quickly reiterate on Glenn's points, I think the legislation needs greater clarity. I also want to point out, while Glenn, notes that it's about housing developments, not housing units, I just want to make clear, I'm working with a community right now, 25%, over 25% of their housing is qualified affordable. And as this reads in statute, such plan shall specify how the municipality intends to increase the number of affordable housing developments. Well, I think that's a disservice. This community doesn't need to increase their affordable housing. They are housing an unfair share of the region's poor. They need wealth creation, and their biggest problem is a deteriorating housing stock and investment in the existing housing. So statutory language that tells them they must increase their affordable housing, I think misses the vast amount of challenges that we have in housing overall. And with that, I will shut up and kick it over to Tim and Jeremy. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Jeremy, you're all set? Go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you all for inviting me. I think this is very interesting, and I know I've had many conversations with Glenn over the past few years. Glenn worked with us on our plan of conservation and development, and he's very familiar with Darien. And I'll take a side detour here. Many of you may be familiar with Darien, and I know, Tim, you are. And certainly when you say Darien or Greenwich or Stamford, it comes with preconceived notions. And when Glenn was working on our town plan, he comes down here and for numerous meetings, and he says, Jeremy, you guys have a story to tell. And it's not what people think. Yes, there are many people who have lots of big houses. Some would call them mansions. I can't disagree. On large lots on the water, and they own boats. But there is another story of higher density housing. And in fact, one of the reasons I was late to this meeting, I was in the selectman's office. The selectman's getting complaints that there are too many multifamily units now under construction in Darien in the nature of 300, which one would say is about 0.5% of our housing stock with the cranes out there right now. So Darien is an unusual circumstance. There is a lot of demand for all kinds of housing, and there's a lot of pressure on the Planning and Zoning Commission to not only work on these plans, but a lot of pending applications to approve as much as they can, because the demand is there, and there's a lot of developers willing to build the supply. So when Don mentioned earlier that one of the key components is the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that's why we've decided to have the Planning and Zoning Commission take the lead on this, because what we've seen on the ground today is results as of zoning changes, as a result of zoning changes. So we're seeing cranes and units and deed restrictions because the Planning and Zoning Commission was willing to change the zoning on numerous parcels through the years, which actually created projects, and those projects are being built. So we've had a lot of success, especially in the past 5 to 10 years. We've had success on rezoning properties, as Goslin noted earlier, owned by our local housing authority. They own 2 parcels. The Planning and Zoning Commission doubled the density on each of those parcels, and those 2 projects have been constructed. So boom, right off the bat, you're doubling the number of units. And as Don mentioned, those are the very low and low income are the toughest units to build, and housing authorities play an integral piece in getting that type of unit constructed. The other advantage of the Planning and Zoning Commission is they're familiar with cause and effect. They see the results, and they're an elected body. So they have a pulse of the community. What I'm finding more and more is members of the public are not hesitant to call their representatives on the Planning and Zoning Commission with input, feedback, concerns about day-to-day traffic and whatever issues they may have. Someone gets a parking ticket, they're going to call the member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So certainly I felt that they were the best way to get this plan done. We were originally going to work with Westcog, who Goslin noted did a 130-page document, very heavy in data collection. It's a great resource. We've created a website, darien.ct.gov/AH plan, and posted resources such as the Westcog plan and the plan Glenn did for Fairfield to give folks an understanding that, we're not alone in planning on our affordable housing. Other towns are doing it. The region's doing it. Here's some ideas and thoughts that other people have used to try to move things along. We had one of our planners retired, so we're using him as a resource, familiar with local issues, And I think the key that Jocelyn and Don mentioned, what's going to get implemented? Let's come up with a plan on something that's logical, feasible, and is going to get buy-in from the community. And to put in a number of recommendations that are not going to go anywhere, that's a waste of everyone's time. So let's figure out what can gain traction, what's likely to pass, what's likely to get support. As I mentioned, our town plan of conservation and development was just completed in 2016. So when the requirement was passed by the legislature in 2017, and that gave us 5 years to work on an affordable housing plan, the commission had not yet even started implementing items in the town plan. And when I spoke to Glenn a few months ago, he noted one of the issues which he mentioned to you today, which is when you have 169 communities trying to get a plan done all at once, there's not enough Jocelyn's and Glenn's and Don's out there to help 100 and some communities. So in my opinion, it would make more sense to spread these plans out, the requirements out, so that they come trickling into the state 20 every year or 15 every year for 10 years, and maybe tie it as it relates to a community's town plan, because the random 2022 date, each community in the state has a town plan due every 10 years. So maybe it makes sense to give a little breathing room between one and the other, somehow, some way, find a way to tie them together. So there's more resources by consultants available to assist communities, because there's a point in 2022, not enough outside help, at least in my opinion. Glenn and Jocelyn might disagree. So I will say that, again, things are a little different here. Each community is a little unique. We have our unique circumstances here. And what we had to do was find a group that we think was sensitive to what needs to get done and is able to come up with the right solutions that will result in change on the ground. And I think the planning and zoning has proven that they can do that. And that's why in Darien, that's what's the group that's been assigned to work on the plan, and we expect to have ours done in a few months. Happy to answer any questions folks may have about how things are going here in Darien.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you all. That was just fabulous. Exactly what I think we need. Let's take a couple of quick minutes for questions, and I'll ask one that I'm sure is in everybody's mind. And it goes back to what Jocelyn said, nine meetings a month. Michelle O'Connor, group member, circulated the draft West Cog plan, which I believe is 12 municipalities. And I've been through it, and there's a wealth of data. So, is one of the answers here to approach this at least at the education level on a regional basis? What do you think about that?
Can I answer that?
Yes, please.
I only 3 months ago, I worked for Northwest Hills Council of Governments. And, I think, it was pointed out that, again, that the West Cog plan, as an example, has a lot of data in it that I think is useful to all of the towns. Northwest Hills Cog did something similar, where we, again, made the data available to all of our towns. So I think that part can be done regionally. I think that's terrific. But personally, I think the actual development of the housing plan, and again, the engaging the stakeholders in the towns, that has to be done on a town by town basis. It's just too hard, I say, as a former regional planner, to engage individual residents in the conversation around their town's housing needs if it's done in a regional way instead of in a local way.
Okay, that's a very interesting sticking point. We're going to have to talk about that one. All right, anybody else have questions for our panelists before we're got about 10 minutes left?
Can I just note one,
yes, go ahead.
Maybe quick things?
Yes.
I just want to say, I would personally not think it, for example, if this committee decided to recommend or that the legislation be clarified to require that planning and zoning commissions be the ones that develop the housing plan, I don't think that would a good idea. I think Planning and Zoning Commission should definitely be involved. And maybe in some towns, or maybe most of the towns, they are the ones that are the most appropriate to do it. But I don't think that should be required, because in some of the towns I've worked with, again, 16 at this point, that didn't make sense for reasons that I could tell you about later if you're interested. But
Yeah.
I just don't think it should be required. I think they should be required to, in my view, what we always do is have the Planning and Zoning Commission at the very least review the draft housing plan and state that it is consistent with the town's plan of conservation and development. That is critical. And like you guys all said, there needs to be buy-in from those folks. There shouldn't be zoning strategies in your housing plan that the Planning and Zoning Commission don't agree to. But I don't think it should be required that that be the entity that do it. And I also wouldn't want to see the legislation change to require some specific entity in the town to adopt the housing plan. Because again, I think it would be nice if there was some more clarity around who adopts it. But frankly, again, working in 16 different towns, having that flexibility to figure out what works for those towns individually was actually pretty great. For example, I would not want legislation to require that the town meeting in a small town adopt a housing plan. I have done that in one of my towns, but it's not for every town in my view.
If I could just, Tim, if I could push back a little bit, I just want to, not that I disagree with Jocelyn, but I think there's different views here. You know, the idea of recommendations shouldn't end up in the plan if they're not going to be implemented by the zoning commission. Well, then if in one of my cases, if you have a zoning commission that's just in opposition to every recommendation for changes to zoning, then how do you actually move forward and do anything? I can create all the incentives and create all this stuff about things we should do about housing. But if you can't actually get the zoning, then how are you actually going to move anywhere on housing and affordability? Once again, just, you know, Jocelyn used the phrase housing plan, and I just want to be clear, as reading in statute, I keep on, with my towns, I keep on saying it's a housing and affordability plan. But the fact that it's under 8-30 tells me it's an affordable housing plan. And that's what the directive is in there. And I think there's two differences between creating a housing plan for a community and creating an affordable housing plan. And I just see zoning as a key barrier here, and they have to be front and center in the engagement.
I'd just like to chime in on that too, because I think I agree with both of you, but in the following way. I think one of the challenges with planning and zoning commissions is sometimes they're the ones that are holding the innovative strategies back. Because they're elected, let's say, and they're worried about constituencies and getting reelected. And so, in the words of Lee Iacocca, lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way. And planning and zoning commissions do need to be coordinated with to make sure that strategies work. But sometimes you got to be able to push just a little bit. Otherwise, we're going to make all these great pronouncements about strategies for affordable housing, but they may not come to fruition. And I think the message is, how do we create units rather than create plans? I think that's the challenge we face as a state, and how can we get there? So I like Jocelyn's idea of flexibility to let the town pick, but OPM could issue a guidance document that says, we'll accept the following entities, but not these entities. It can't be the Park and Recreation Commission. It can't be, it needs to be, a defined group. So you guys have a lot of work ahead of you, and I wish you well in your journey.
Okay. All right, one more call. Any questions for our panelists before we do a couple minutes of admin?
Yeah, this is Matt. I have a quick question.
Go ahead, Matt.
I think it was Glenn who mentioned the importance of case studies in assisting towns in developing affordable housing plans. I'm wondering if there are any that come to mind, good case studies that you think would be useful to towns in this work.
I think a list could be put together, because I do think it's the way. I like the fact that Jocelyn's plan to answer the questions that are top of mind for people. It really humanizes the plan, and they can now sort of answer that. And if there could be case studies that say, okay, look at what the town of Roxbury did. And so even if it's a pre-printed blurb or something else like that, it says, okay, these accessory dwelling units and 2 per property, the world's not going to end. And now that provides guidance for discussion and it's publicized, right? I had not known about Roxbury till Jocelyn talked about it today, but even if the Partnership for Strong Communities, I send people to their website because they have the frequently asked questions about, affordable housing and everything else. Continue to populate that with case studies about success stories on ADUs, information on, Fairfield and New Canaan have housing trust funds. They were some of the first in the state. And what they've done with their funds is really kind of remarkable. Other towns saw that and said, okay, maybe we could get some funds to do some other things. So I think the more education that we can do and resources for people to go to would be a great step forward.
Very good. Thank you, Matt, for that question. All right, last call. Any questions? Okay, panelists, thank you immensely. That was just terrific. Lots of things to think about. We're going to do a couple minutes of admin. You're welcome to stay on, but again, I'll circle back with all of you. And Jocelyn and Glenn, if we could have your slides, you can send them to me and I'll share them with the Ashley and Erica and Alex, our assisting staff. Appreciate that. Okay. Okay. Committee working group members, we just have a couple of minutes and a couple items to talk about. We had talked last time about having a subgroup to draft a really important, maybe not terribly long, but a really important section of our eventual report, why affordable housing is important. The people that I had got emails back from volunteering are Rick Porth, Melissa Kaplan-Macy, Fionnuala Darby Hudgens, and Tania Edwards and Emily McAvoy. So if one of you all have each other's emails, if one of you would just take the bull by the horns and or you just maybe organize your separate online discussion to get that underway, I would just say in the next 60 to 90 days, if you could give us a couple of paragraphs that would go into the report, that would be a tremendous help to the group process. If anybody wants to add on to that group, email me or any of the people that I just mentioned, and appreciate all of you taking that on. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Can you have, I think it's Erica helping you. Can you have Erica send me that list again?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, with the agenda, you got a very good list of the documents that were referred to in the chat room or during the last meeting, most notably the Regional Plan Association Guidebook from 2020. And as I mentioned, Michelle O'Connor was kind enough to send the WestCog report. And, as you're probably now realizing, we're putting a lot of reading in front of us, and I'm getting to as much of it as I can, but I think we all need to just do as much as we can to familiarize ourselves, and even to the granular level of individual municipality plans, which are starting to come out at a fairly rapid pace. But as we go through the process, I think as much reading and background as we can do would be helpful. Okay, the next item is we have the full committee, the full commission on Monday, next Monday, the 4th. I believe you should have gotten an email from the staff asking whether you are going to attend in person or online. And my intention, subject to discussion with Representative Lamar, is to just give a couple-minute summary of what we have done in our first 3 meetings. No editorials, just explaining the content of what we have received so far. So I guess it falls to Representative Lamar and me to lead that, but certainly after we do, if anyone has if I missed anything, you can chime in and add your perspective. Now, which brings me to the
Tim, a second. Tim?
Yes, go ahead, Matt.
What time on Monday? I'm not sure I saw that email.
Yeah, it's 4 o'clock at the in-person is at the Legislative Office Building in Hartford, room 1D. I think that email came on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Sorry to interrupt. The email went out only to the commission members, so it didn't go out to the working group members.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right. Thank
Yeah,
you for
but
that.
the information
clarification.
is available on the CGA website.
Yeah, and Matt, I'll send it to you. Just I'll send it to the whole groups just so everybody has it.
Tim, it's 3:00, by the way.
It is?
Yeah, that's what the notice that I just received.
Yes,
references.
3:00. Thank you, Betsy.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Thank you for saving me, Betsy, as always. Okay, now the last thing is our ill-fated in-person meeting on April 8th. I heard back from 11, which is about half of the people, and guess what? 6 votes for New Haven and 5 votes for Hartford. So I'm kind of loath to sort of say, based on those returns, that we're going to have a 3-hour in-person meeting on the 8th. I just don't want to drag people. Yeah, I don't have a small meeting. So here's what I'm going to propose for your okay, which is that we just keep meeting online, just because I think it's convenient for everybody. And again, I didn't get a chance to talk about this with Representative Lamar, but what I would propose is that we have 2 meetings in each of the next 3 months. So a meeting online on April 8th from 2 to 4 p.m. And I'll put this out in an email, obviously. Then this time slot, 4 to 5 p.m. on, as we have been doing on Thursday, April 21st, in May, Thursday, the 12th, and Thursday, the 26th. And then in June on Thursday, the 9th and the 23rd. So those 5 meetings would be keeping the Thursday 4 to 5 p.m. timeframe. And, if anybody totally disagrees, I mean, I'm all ears, but I just didn't want to force everybody's hand with a in-person meeting, because I just didn't get a ringing response to that's what people want to do. But my thought on the April 8th meeting, the 2-hour time frame, is that the appropriate topic at this point in our process would be to really start talking about what the content of our eventual report is going to be, proceeding from a lot of the feedback that we just got in the past hour. I have already started with just a very rough sort of outline of what our report might look like, what the things that we would want to include in it. So what I'd like to do is, by the early part of next week, is circulate that outline to the working group members, and then hopefully we can have a nice robust discussion on April 8th. And you can, just really a free-flowing conversation. Here's where I think our efforts should focus, what we should focus on, what we should include, not include, and that will serve as hopefully a launching pad for what will eventually become our report. So let me stop there. Comments, questions, dissents, objections? Tim, you're out of your mind. Anything along those lines? So, okay. Silence is golden. Okay. Erica, Ashley, the dates that I threw out, anything off the bat that you see problematic with those dates? And again, I'll email them to you as soon as we're done here.
Yeah, I'll have to take a closer look at them, but I don't
Okay.
anticipate them at this point being a problem.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. And I don't see that Representative Lamar was able to join us. So I will circle back with him. And since we are past 5 o'clock, I'm going to last call comments. And by the way, if I didn't say this before, I try to run a tight ship, but I'm not a dictator. I really, anytime any of you has any suggestions, Tim, I don't like what we're doing, email me, please. I want this to be a consensual, cooperative process. I very much appreciate your assistance. I hope you found today's conversation interesting. I couldn't write my notes fast enough. I think that was just a great compilation of a lot of wisdom in a short period of time. And I think it'll serve us well as we go forward. So, okay. All right, then sin no more. Have a wonderful evening and go UConn.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good
Thank
one.
you.